Indian men, when young, were hunters and warriors. When old, counselors. All their government was by the council. There was no force, no prison, and no policemen. They studied oratory, and the best speakers had the most influence. Indian women were the records of the tribal council. They had to remember exactly what was said and pass it on to their children. In 1877, Chief Joseph and his people, the Nez Percés, fled 1,600 miles through the rugged Northwest to escape the United States Army. 30 miles from the Canadian border, conditions became so severe that Joseph and his warriors and their women and children were forced to surrender. They were sent to Kansas, the most alien climate available, where many of them died.
All men were made by the same Great Spirit, Chief. They are all brothers. The earth is the mother of all people, and all people should have equal rights upon it. You might as well expect the rivers to run backward, as that any man who was born a free man should be content when pinned up and denied liberty to go where he pleases. Hear me, my chiefs. My heart is sick and tired. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever.
Stone-cut printing is a primitive art form that goes back to the Chinese rubbings of 2,000 years ago. Being born and raised in Canada, I was introduced to it by the Eskimos of Baffin Island, a primitive people like the Indians, who share a closeness to nature and her secrets. Red Cloud, born in 1822, was one of the most powerful of the Sioux chieftains. In his later years, he changed his ideas about war and became an advocate of peace. On June 17, 1870, he and his wife, as guests of President Ulysses S. Grant, went to New York on a peace crusade.
The Great Spirit made us both. He gave us land, and He gave you land. You came here, and we received you as brothers. He made you all white and clothed you. He made us with red skins and poor. He made you to eat tame game, and us to eat wild game. You do not know who appears before you to speak. He is a representative of the original American race. We are good and not bad. All I want is right and justice. I represent the whole Sioux nation, and they will be bound by what I say.
Sitting Bull, born in South Dakota in 1834, was the most famous chief of the Lakota Sioux. Along with Crazy Horse, he was responsible for the defeat of General Custer at the Little Bighorn. The Indians were dependent on the buffalo for their existence, and the buffalo were becoming extinct. There was no hope of winning the war against the whites. Sitting Bull and his people retreated to Canada, and after 4 years of homesickness and hunger, returned to the United States and surrendered. He was murdered in 1890.
Hear me, my brothers. We have now to do with another race. They were few and weak when our grandfathers first met them. They are now many and powerful. It is a strange thing, but they want to plow the earth, and greed is a disease among them. They have made many laws. These the rich may break, but the poor may not. They take money from the poor and weak to support the rich and powerful. They say that our mother, the earth, is theirs to own, and they fence out their neighbors. They mutilate our mother with their buildings and their refuse. They are like a river in spate, which in spring overflows its banks and destroys everything in its path. We cannot live side by side. 7 years ago, we made a treaty with the white men which promised us that the land of the buffalo would be ours forever. Now they threaten to take that from us too. Shall we yield to them, brothers? Or shall we say to them, you must kill me first before you take possession of my country?
The Indian knew America was a paradise and couldn't understand why the white man wanted to destroy all that was Indian as well as all that was American. Crazy Horse was the greatest military genius of the Sioux Nation. His name sent fear into the hearts of the whites coming into his country, as well as the boldest warriors of his Indian enemies. Fearless in battle, he believed he could not be killed by a bullet. He wouldn't allow his picture to be taken because it would be stealing his shadow. Faced with imprisonment after being promised freedom, he was killed under a white flag by a soldier's bayonet. He was 28 years old.
We preferred our own way of living. We were no expense to the government. All we wanted was peace and to be left alone, but the government would not let us alone. Now, my friends, they are here in our country looking for us to kill. In this war, we must fight them in a different way from any the Lakotas have ever seen. Not with the counting of many coups or doing great deeds to be told at the victory dance. We must make this a war of killing, a war of finishing, so we can live in peace in our own country. It is not that I have always hated the whites like some others here. It was not so with me. We were friends. But for me, there is no country that can hold the tracks of the moccasin and the boots of the white man side by side.
In my heart, I have always believed that the Indian way of life was right. Their beliefs about the world and man's connection with nature were right. In 1876, Geronimo became the leader of the Apaches in the Southwest. His mother, who taught him the tribal lessons, along with his wife and children, were killed 9 years later by the Mexicans. He was a master of guerrilla warfare. It took 5,000 U.S. Army troops and 500 hired Indian scouts to capture Geronimo and what was left of his band, 36 Apaches, including women and children.
There is one God looking down on us all. We are children of one God. God is listening to me. The sun, the darkness, the winds are all listening to what we now say.
Washakie was the head chief of the Shoshones for almost 60 years. Even though he was primarily a great warrior, he brought peace and protection to both his people and the whites who passed through his country. Though a passionate lover of the free life, he had the wisdom to see that the old days were numbered. He and his people served the U.S. Army with such distinction that a frontier army post in the Wind River Valley of Wyoming was named in his honor.
The white man who possesses this whole vast country from sea to sea, who roams over it at pleasure and lives where he likes, cannot know the cramp we feel in this little spot. with the undying remembrance of the fact that every foot that you call America not very long ago belonged to the red man. The Great Spirit gave it to us. There was room enough for all his many tribes, and all were happy in their freedom. And so, at last, our fathers were steadily driven out or killed, and we, their sons, but sorry remnants of tribes once mighty.
Like ripples in a stream, words spread out and touch others. If we had listened, we could have learned much from the Indians, but the difference between the cultures was too great. The white man in 200 years destroyed the country's environment beyond all recognition. The red man lived here for centuries without leaving a scar. Plentycoo, the last real chief of the Crow Nation, died in 1932. He had seen much of the old life of the Plains Indian and knew that his people would have to adapt to the changing times. In spite of all that had happened to prejudice him against the whites, he was always a patriotic American.
They spoke very loudly when they said their laws were made for everybody. But we soon learned that, although they expected us to keep them, they thought nothing of breaking them themselves. They told us not to drink whiskey, yet they made it themselves and traded it to us for furs and robes until both were nearly gone. Their wise ones said we might have their religion, but when we tried to understand it, we found that there were too many kinds of religion among the white men for us to understand, and that scarcely any two white men agreed which was the right one to learn. This bothered us a good deal, until we saw that the white man did not take his religion any more seriously than he did his laws, and he kept both of them just behind him like helpers to use when they might do him good in his dealings with strangers. These were not our ways. We kept the laws we made and lived our religion.